The psychological trigger that makes him feel her everywhere. There wasn't one dramatic moment that made him realize he couldn't let her go. It wasn't seeing her with someone else. It wasn't losing contact. It wasn't some perfect goodbye. It was stranger than that. It was reaching for his phone after something funny happened, and realizing his thumb already knew where her name used to be. It was hearing a stranger laugh in a grocery store and turning around before his brain could catch up. It was making coffee exactly the way she liked it, even though she hadn't been in his apartment for months. People think men forget because they stop talking. Sometimes they stop talking because forgetting isn't working. And there is one psychological trigger almost nobody notices. The moment the nervous system realizes that someone has quietly become part of how reality itself is experienced. Not just someone you miss. Someone you accidentally keep looking for. Everywhere. I don't think it happens the way people imagine. Nobody wakes up one morning and says, "This person has become part of how I experience life." If anything, it happens while you're distracted, while you're arguing about where to park, while you're making coffee, while you're laughing at something so stupid neither of you will remember the joke 6 months later. The strange thing is, those are the moments that stay. Not because they were extraordinary, because they quietly became normal. And that's the dangerous part. People always ask when he fell for her. They're looking for one memory, one dramatic scene, one kiss, one confession, one night where everything changed. I don't think there was one. I think there were hundreds of tiny moments his brain never bothered to label as important, until she wasn't there anymore. Then suddenly, every ordinary moment started feeling unfinished. I remember someone once telling me, "You don't really notice the furniture in your house until somebody moves it." Relationships can become like that. Not exciting every second. Not cinematic. Just integrated. She wasn't constantly on his mind. She became part of the background his mind depended on. There's a difference. A huge one. Because when someone lives in your thoughts, you miss them. But when someone quietly becomes part of your internal world, you stop realizing where you end and they begin. That sounds dramatic. I know. Maybe it is. Or maybe it's embarrassingly ordinary. Because it looked something like this. He'd see something ridiculous online. And before he even laughed, his brain had already started imagining how she'd react. Not consciously. It happened before language. Oh, she'd hate this. No. She'd actually laugh at this. Then he'd realize she wasn't there. That tiny pause lasted maybe 2 seconds. Most people wouldn't even notice it. But his nervous system did. There's something uncomfortable about admitting this, especially for men, because it sounds dependent. And a lot of men spend years convincing themselves they're completely self-contained. I don't need anyone. I've always been independent. I've got my own life. Maybe. But independence isn't the same thing as emotional isolation. The truth is, our brains are incredibly lazy. Once someone becomes emotionally safe, the brain starts using them as a shortcut. You don't decide to think about them. The mind simply expects them to exist. That's why the absence feels so confusing. Because nothing looks different. His apartment is the same. The coffee tastes the same. The drive to work is the same. Even the weather is probably the same. So why does everything feel slightly off? Not devastating. Just misaligned. Like walking into your kitchen and finding one cabinet moved 3 inches to the left. Technically everything still works, but your hand keeps reaching for where it used to be. I think that's what happened to him. Although he would have denied it back then. Completely. If someone had asked, "So, you're attached?" he would have laughed. "No. We're just seeing each other. It's not that serious." Funny how people say that while checking their phone every 7 minutes. Funny how people say that while automatically buying enough food for 2. Funny how people say that while memorizing another person's coffee order without realizing it. He didn't know. That's the point. De-integration happens quietly, almost invisibly, like learning the layout of a city. One day you suddenly stop using GPS. You don't remember when that happened. It just did. She became emotionally familiar in exactly the same way. There was this tiny memory I don't even know why stayed with me. They were leaving a grocery store. Nothing romantic. Nothing Instagram-worthy. She disappeared for maybe 30 seconds because she'd forgotten something. He kept pushing the cart, then instinctively slowed down. Without thinking, without looking, his body simply assumed she'd catch up beside him. It waited, not consciously, just waited. When she came back, she lightly tapped the cart with the bottle she'd grabbed. He looked over. She smiled. Neither of them said anything. That was it. 30 seconds. Completely forgettable. Except, months later, he remembered that moment more vividly than anniversaries. Why? Because that's how emotional memory works. It doesn't preserve importance. It preserves safety. I used to think love was built through conversations. Now I'm not so sure. I think it's built through repetition. The 1,000 tiny confirmations that someone will probably still be there 5 minutes from now. She'd probably answer. She'd probably laugh. She'd probably tell me I'm overthinking. She'd probably steal one of my fries. She'd probably leave a hair tie somewhere in my apartment again. He complained about those hair ties. Actually, he genuinely found them annoying. One in the bathroom. One on the kitchen counter. One somehow inside the passenger seat. He rolled his eyes every time. Then after she was gone, he found one underneath the couch while vacuuming. And for a few seconds, he just stared at it. Not because it was meaningful, because his body reacted before his thoughts did. He actually smiled. Then almost immediately, his chest tightened. He sat down on the floor, holding a black elastic hair tie. It felt ridiculous. Seriously? He muttered to himself. It's just a hair tie. Was it? Or was it evidence that someone had slowly woven themselves into the smallest corners of his life? Here's the strange thing about emotional attachment. It almost never announces itself. It disguises itself as routine, as inconvenience, as habit, as normal, until normal disappears. Then suddenly, every ordinary thing starts echoing, not because she's haunting him, because his own brain keeps predicting her presence. He walks into a bookstore. His eyes immediately drift toward the section she spent too long browsing. He hears a sarcastic joke. For half a second, he's already composing the text he'd send her. Then he remembers. Oh, right. There's nowhere to send it. Those tiny interruptions don't break you. They weigh you down. Quietly. He doesn't tell anyone about moments like that. What would he even say? Hey, I almost texted someone who isn't part of my life anymore because I saw a weird-looking dog. It sounds pathetic. So he keeps it inside. He laughs with friends. He goes to work, answers emails, pays bills, makes dinner. Everything looks normal. Meanwhile, his mind keeps performing little emotional U-turns all day long. There she is. No, never mind. Sometimes the body notices before the mind does. He'll reach for 2 coffee mugs, catch himself, put one back. He'll unlock his phone, without even realizing he was hoping for her name to appear. Not expecting, just hoping. There's a difference. Although he'd never admit that aloud. If anyone asked, "You still think about her?" he'd shrug. Sometimes. That's a funny word. Sometimes meant every single day. Just not every minute. You don't miss her. I know. Then why did you smile when you heard that song? I forgot it reminded me of her. Did you? I don't know. You're still answering questions about her that nobody asked. I know. That's the part people rarely talk about. He wasn't drowning in memories. He was bumping into them. Over and over. Like walking through a familiar house in the dark. You know exactly where the furniture should be. So when something has been removed, your body still moves as if it's there. That's what she became. Not an obsession. Not a fantasy. Not perfection. She became part of the map his mind quietly used to navigate ordinary life. And he didn't realize the map had changed until he started getting lost in places that used to feel like home. The strange thing is, he doesn't wake up every morning deciding to think about her. If anything, he wakes up determined not to. That's the part people misunderstand. They imagine he's sitting alone, replaying old conversations, listening to sad songs, refusing to move on. Sometimes he does. Most days, though, he's just trying to get through Tuesday. He's answering emails, trying to remember if he paid the electric bill, wondering what to make for dinner, complaining about traffic, living what appears to be an ordinary life. And then, without warning, his brain does something before he even realizes it. A woman walks past wearing a perfume that's almost hers. Not exactly, just close enough. His head turns, not because he thinks it's actually her. His body has already moved before his mind catches up. For maybe half a second, there's expectation, then disappointment, then embarrassment. He keeps walking. Nobody notices. Not even him. Really. Except something inside him feels strangely tired afterward. Tiny moments like that happen dozens of times. They're so small they don't seem worth mentioning. But that's exactly why they matter. People think memory is like opening a photo album. You choose when to look. You decide when to remember. Real memory isn't like that. Real memory is intrusive. It hides inside ordinary life. The brain isn't asking, "Do you want to think about her today?" It's asking something much simpler. What usually happens here? That's all. The mind is constantly making predictions. You park in the same spot because that's where you parked yesterday. You reach for the light switch without looking. You expect your favorite coffee shop to still smell like roasted beans when you walk inside. Your brain survives by guessing what comes next. And for a while, she became part of those guesses. Not because he was obsessed, because she had become familiar. There's this misconception that emotional attachment always feels dramatic. Honestly, most of the time it feels incredibly practical. He started buying strawberries because she liked them, even though he never finished eating them. Eventually they would go bad in the refrigerator. He'd throw them away, buy another box the following week. Not intentionally. He simply forgot they weren't really his habit. One afternoon he opened the refrigerator, looked at another untouched container, and actually laughed. A quiet laugh, the kind you make when nobody's around. Then he said out loud, "What am I doing?" The apartment didn't answer. Of course it didn't. Still, he stood there longer than necessary, holding strawberries, like they had somehow become evidence against him. He kept telling himself, "I'm fine," and maybe he believed it. Mostly, until little moments kept interrupting him. He'd hear exciting news at work. His first impulse, before celebration, was, "I should tell her." Then, nothing. His fingers would unlock his phone anyway. Muscle memory. He'd scroll for a second, stop, lock the screen again. Nobody saw that. Those are the moments people never witness. Not the dramatic crying. Not heartbreak in the rain. Just tiny aborted movements. The body beginning a familiar routine, before reality quietly corrects it. It's amazing how often the body wins that race, long before logic arrives. He once heard someone call her name in a crowded airport. Not even the same woman, just the same first name. His chest tightened instantly. His eyes searched the crowd. Then came the rational thought. It can't be her. It wasn't. But the reaction had already happened. It's almost embarrassing. Like sneezing. You can't decide not to. Sometimes I wonder if this is why moving on feels so confusing. Because people think they're fighting emotions. Sometimes they're actually fighting prediction. They're trying to retrain a brain that has become incredibly efficient. For months, or years, one person occupied certain emotional spaces. Now those spaces are empty. The brain doesn't immediately update the map. It keeps checking, almost politely, like knocking on a door that used to open. He hated admitting that. Actually, no. Hated is too dramatic. He resisted admitting it. There's a difference. Because admitting it meant acknowledging that someone had affected him more deeply than he wanted. And if there's one thing a lot of men become experts at, it's minimizing emotional impact. It wasn't that serious. It was just timing. We wanted different things. Maybe. Sometimes that's true. That explanations don't erase conditioning. He could explain the breakup perfectly. His nervous system didn't care. One evening he drove home after work. Same route. Same red lights. Same gas station. About halfway home he realized he'd been mentally rehearsing a story he wanted to tell her. It wasn't even important. Something funny his coworker had said. He'd already imagined her interrupting him halfway through. Imagined her laughing before he reached the punchline. Imagined rolling his eyes because she'd ruined it. He smiled. Actually smiled. Then the smile disappeared almost immediately. Because none of that conversation was going to happen. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. He turned the radio off. The silence suddenly sounded louder. You're doing it again. Doing what? Talking to someone who isn't here. I wasn't. Then who were you telling that story to? I forgot. No. You remembered. That's what makes this psychological trigger so difficult to explain. He isn't consciously searching for her. His brain simply keeps generating versions of reality that still include her. Like outdated software. The update hasn't fully installed. There are days when this gets strangely physical. He'll reach the end of a long day. Nothing terrible happened. Nothing emotional happened. But he feels exhausted. Not sleepy. Different. As if his brain has been solving hundreds of tiny problems all day. Because it has. Every reminder requires adjustment. Every expectation requires correction. Every prediction ends with, no, she's not part of this anymore. Most of those corrections happen beneath awareness. They're invisible. But invisible doesn't mean effortless. He started noticing something else. His apartment felt louder. Not because it actually was. Because there was no second rhythm. No footsteps in another room. No cabinet opening unexpectedly. No random humming while someone searched for their charger. Silence has texture. You don't notice that until it changes. He used to complain when she'd leave kitchen cabinets open. It drove him crazy. Can you just close them? She'd laugh. I forgot. Months later, he walked into the kitchen and realized every cabinet was perfectly shut. Everything exactly where he'd always wanted it. Everything organized. Everything quiet. And somehow, he missed the inconvenience. That realization irritated him. What is wrong with me? Nothing. Probably. Humans don't only become attached to comfort. Sometimes we become attached to disruption. To another person's imperfect rhythm interrupting our own. That's another uncomfortable truth. He didn't only miss the good parts. He missed the annoying parts too. The way she'd steal the blanket. The way she'd ask where her phone was while holding it. The way she'd interrupt movies to ask questions she could have answered by waiting another 30 seconds. He used to sigh dramatically. Can you just watch? She'd smile. No. Back then he thought those interruptions were irritating. Now, He couldn't remember the ending of the movie. Only her voice. Funny how memory edits things. Not into perfection, into presence. He tries distracting himself. The gym, longer work hours, new hobbies, weekend trips. Some of it genuinely helps. Some of it doesn't. Because distraction changes attention. It doesn't immediately rewrite expectation. Expectation is stubborn, especially when it was built slowly. Then one afternoon something happens that almost makes him laugh. He's standing in line at a coffee shop. The woman in front of him orders exactly what she used to order. Without thinking, he almost says, "She want oatmeal." She, not the stranger. Her. He catches himself before the words leave his mouth. The cashier looks confused because he's suddenly smiling to himself. He shakes his head. No. Nothing. He takes his coffee, walks outside, sits in his car, and just stares through the windshield. Not crying, not devastated, just quietly amazed by how automatic the human brain can become. Maybe that's the real psychological trigger. Not love, not loss, not longing. Familiarity. The mind doesn't only remember people. It remembers how to expect them. It builds invisible shortcuts around their existence. Then one day they're gone. But the shortcuts remain. And every ordinary moment becomes a tiny collision between the world as it is, and the world his brain is still, almost innocently, expecting to find. Because the hardest part wasn't convincing himself she had left. The hardest part was teaching his own mind to stop looking for someone it had quietly started believing would always be there. The breakup wasn't the hardest part. At least, not for him. The goodbye was loud. It had words, silence, maybe tears, maybe anger, maybe that strange politeness people use when they're trying not to completely fall apart. There was something to respond to, something happening. But afterward, life became quiet again. And that's when the real work began. Because nobody prepares you for how ordinary grief can become. Not dramatic, just repetitive, almost boring. Until one random Tuesday completely catches you off guard. He thought the hardest memory would be their last conversation. It wasn't. Months later, he could barely remember exactly what either of them said. Funny how that works. The brain blurred the ending, but it remembered tiny things with impossible clarity. The way she'd always leave one kitchen cabinet slightly open. The sound of her keys hitting the counter before she took off her shoes. The fact that she always forgot to plug in her phone before going to bed and asked for his charger every single morning. He used to tease her about it. You know phones don't magically charge themselves. She'd roll her eyes. I know. You've said that every morning. I know. Then she'd smile. That smile. Why was it the smile he remembered? Not the arguments. Not the promises. Just that. One night he was brushing his teeth. Nothing emotional about brushing your teeth. It's probably one of the least romantic things humans do. Halfway through, he reached into the drawer and instinctively grabbed the toothpaste from the left side. Then he stopped. She used to insist on putting it there. He always moved it back to the right. They'd quietly undo each other's habits almost every day. Neither of them cared enough to argue. It became one of those ridiculous little domestic games. Now, the toothpaste stayed exactly where he left it. Every day. Perfectly still. He stared at it for a second longer than necessary. Then laughed. A tired laugh. So, I finally won. It didn't feel like winning. Nobody tells you this. Sometimes what you miss isn't affection. It's interruption. You miss someone breaking your routines. Someone asking where their wallet is while you're already late. Someone stealing your hoodie because they're cold. Someone standing in the bathroom doorway while you're trying to shave because they suddenly remembered something completely unimportant. Back then, those interruptions felt inconvenient. No, they feel strangely luxurious because they meant someone else's life was constantly colliding with yours. The empty passenger seat became its own strange experience. At first, he didn't notice it. Then one afternoon, he drove past a bakery they used to stop at. Without thinking, he looked toward the passenger seat. Actually looked, almost as if expecting to ask, "Do you want coffee?" There was nobody there. Just a jacket he'd thrown across the seat earlier that morning. For one embarrassing second, his brain had mistaken the shape of the jacket for a person. He shook his head. "You've got to be kidding." Nobody answered. The traffic light turned green. He kept driving, but something about that moment stayed with him. Not because it was tragic, because it was automatic. It's amazing how loneliness hides inside muscle memory. You don't realize how many conversations happen in your head until there's nobody to finish them. He'd leave work exhausted, see something ridiculous on a billboard. His brain would immediately create the sentence. She'd make fun of that. The sentence stopped halfway, like someone pulling the plug on a movie. The rest never happened. There were songs too. Not their song. Ironically, those weren't the painful ones. The painful ones were songs he'd barely noticed before. Background music inside grocery stores. Random songs playing in an Uber. The music from an old commercial she'd once mocked because the singer sounded overly dramatic. Months later, that commercial came on while he was making dinner. He actually smiled before realizing why. Then, his appetite disappeared. How could 30 seconds of music change an entire evening? He couldn't explain it, so he didn't try. People think grief arrives like waves. Maybe. Sometimes. Other times, it arrives like paper cuts. Tiny, constant, almost invisible, until the accumulation finally makes you stop moving. One Saturday, he decided to clean the apartment. Not because it was dirty, because he couldn't sit still. He vacuumed, wiped every counter, organized a drawer that didn't need organizing, folded towels, alphabetized spices. He even cleaned behind the refrigerator. Who cleans behind the refrigerator? Someone avoiding something. Although he didn't realize that until much later. He kept moving, because movement feels productive. Feeling doesn't. Hours passed. The apartment looked better than it ever had. He stood in the middle of the living room, hands on his hips, completely exhausted. Then, without warning, he started crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just his body finally stopped long enough to notice what it had been running from all afternoon. "Why are you cleaning?" "It needs it." "Really?" "It keeps me busy." "Busy from what?" "I don't know." "You do." "I just don't want to think today." Sometimes the smallest objects became impossible. There was still one coffee mug she'd always use. It wasn't special. Actually, it was chipped. He'd told her at least 5 times to throw it away. "It's cracked. It still works. One day it'll break." It hasn't. After she left, the mug stayed in the cabinet. For weeks. Then months. Not because he was preserving it. He simply couldn't decide what to do with it. Throwing it away felt dishonest. Keeping it felt ridiculous. So it stayed, suspended somewhere between memory and clutter. Kind of like him. Eventually a friend came over. Opened the cabinet. Grabbed the mug. "Dude, this one's cracked." "I know. You should toss it." "Chod, yeah." His friend waited. He didn't move. "I'll do it later." He didn't. Not that day. Maybe not for another month. People outside the experience don't understand this. It's just a mug. Of course it is. It's never actually about the mug. It's about how ordinary objects quietly inherit emotional weight. Not because they're magical, because they participated in real life. That mug had witnessed hundreds of ordinary mornings. Some silent, some sleepy, some filled with laughter. You can't separate the object from the routine it belonged to. At least not immediately. The grocery store became surprisingly difficult. Not because of romance. Because of habit. He'd reach for the yogurt she liked. Then realize. He hated that flavor. Why was he holding it? He put it back. Walked away. Then doubled back because he'd forgotten the cereal. He stood in the aisle longer than necessary. Not looking at cereal. Just standing. Watching strangers choose groceries together. One couple argued about pasta. Another debated which apples were cheaper. Nothing extraordinary. Yet somehow, he felt like he was watching a language he used to speak fluently. There's one memory that keeps coming back. It's almost painfully ordinary. A rain. Not a storm. Just enough to make sidewalks shiny. They'd once walked to the car without an umbrella. She laughed because she was getting soaked. He complained. We're literally 30 seconds away. I know. So why are you walking so slowly? Because I like the rain. You'll get sick. I probably won't. You definitely will. She laughed even harder. Months later, it rained again. Same kind of rain. He walked quickly, unlocked the car, sat inside, looked at the empty passenger seat. Then, without understanding why, he waited another 30 seconds before starting the engine, as if someone was still walking toward the car. He knew they weren't. His body hadn't accepted it yet. He noticed something else. He became strangely protective of memories he used to dismiss. People would ask, "So, what do you miss most?" He never answered honestly, because the truthful answer sounded absurd. Not the vacations, not anniversaries, not expensive dinners. He missed hearing someone yell, "Have you seen my charger?" from another room. He missed pretending to be annoyed when she stole fries off his plate after insisting she wasn't hungry. He missed hearing the bathroom fan left on because she'd always forget to turn it off. He missed reminding someone where they'd left their keys. Those weren't grand romantic moments. They were evidence of a shared life. That's the thing about emotional attachment. It doesn't hide inside milestones. It hides inside repetition. Inside the 1,000 tiny exchanges nobody photographs. Nobody posts online. Nobody even thinks to remember. Until they're gone. Then somehow, those become the only memories that matter. Late one night, he accidentally opened an old conversation. Not intentionally. Her name appeared while searching for someone else. His thumb hovered over the screen. He scrolled, not looking for anything specific. Just wondering. There were grocery lists, pictures of badly cooked pancakes, a screenshot she'd sent because she'd accidentally ordered dog food instead of protein powder, an argument about whether tomatoes belonged in the refrigerator. Nothing profound, nothing cinematic. He expected to find declarations of love. Instead, he found a life. Tiny conversations that had quietly stitched two ordinary people into each other's everyday existence. He smiled, then locked the phone, set it face down on the table. The room stayed silent for a long time. Finally, he whispered something nobody else would ever hear. "I didn't know those would be the things I'd miss." And maybe that's the cruelest psychological trick of all. The goodbye isn't what echoes the longest. It's everything that never looked important while it was happening. The half-finished conversations. The ordinary Tuesdays. The chipped coffee mug. The empty passenger seat. The grocery lists. The interruptions. The little pieces of a shared life that once felt so ordinary. He never imagined they'd one day become the memories that hurt the most. Here's something people rarely admit, especially men. Sometimes pretending you're okay isn't about lying to other people. It's about buying yourself another 24 hours before you have to admit the truth. Because if you say it out loud, "I still miss her," it suddenly becomes real. As long as you avoid the sentence, there's always a tiny part of you that believes maybe you're already over it. Maybe tomorrow will feel different. Maybe this strange heaviness is just stress. Maybe you've just been busy. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're thinking about work. Anything but her. So that's exactly what he tells himself. Every day. From the outside. He looks fine. He still goes to work. Still laughs when someone tells a joke. Still texts his friends back. Still pays his bills. Still goes to the gym 3 evenings a week. If someone asked how he's doing, his answer comes almost automatically. I'm good. No hesitation. No visible crack. The sentence leaves his mouth so easily that sometimes even he believes it. For about 5 minutes. The strange thing about emotional avoidance is that it doesn't always feel like avoidance. Sometimes it feels like responsibility. He tells himself, I just need to stay productive. I don't have time to dwell. There are bigger things to worrying about. It sounds mature, even admirable, until productivity quietly becomes a place to hide. He starts saying yes to everything. Extra shifts, weekend projects, helping friends move, fixing things around the apartment that were never broken. His calendar becomes strangely full. Not because life suddenly became exciting, because silence became dangerous. Silence leaves room for memory. Noise doesn't. There's a reason he always keeps something playing. Music while showering, a podcast during breakfast, the television while folding laundry. Even driving home in complete silence starts feeling uncomfortable. Not because he enjoys constant stimulation, because the moment everything becomes quiet, his own thoughts become louder, and he doesn't trust where they'll go. One evening he forgets to charge his headphones. He's driving home. No music, no podcast, just the sound of tires rolling across the road. For the first 10 minutes, nothing happens. Then, almost without warning, his mind drifts. He starts imagining what she'd think about the new restaurant that opened near his office. Then he catches himself. Again, he sighs, turns the radio on, not because he suddenly wants music, because he wants interruption. It's funny. He used to complain that she talked too much. Now, he fills every empty space with someone else's voice. Anything except his own. There's another habit he develops. One he never tells anyone about. Late at night, when he can't sleep, he opens social media, not intentionally looking for her. That's what he tells himself. He's just scrolling. One post, another, a video of someone's dog, a travel photo, a recipe he'll never cook. His thumb keeps moving, almost mechanically. Then, somehow, he ends up typing her name into the search bar. He doesn't even remember deciding to do it. It's like watching his own hand make choices before his conscious mind catches up. Her profile appears. He stares at it, not opening it, just looking. Then he locks his phone. 5 minutes later, he unlocks it again. Why are you checking? I'm not checking. You literally searched her name. I was just curious. About what? I don't know. Exactly. Curiosity is one of the safest words people use to describe longing. It sounds harmless, scientific, detached, but sometimes curiosity is just grief wearing better clothes. He convinces himself there are rules. I won't message her. I won't like anything. I won't reach out. As long as he follows those rules, he tells himself he's moving on. Maybe he is. Maybe he isn't. Healing isn't measured only by actions. Sometimes it's measured by where your attention goes when nobody is watching. And his attention still wanders back to her. Not every hour. Not even every day. Just often enough that he notices. And hates noticing. His friends start saying things. You seem good. You've bounced back fast. I thought this would hit you harder. He shrugs. So did I. Everyone laughs. Conversation moves on. Nobody realizes he barely slept the night before. Nobody notices he almost texted her after seeing a movie trailer she'd been excited about months ago. Nobody sees him delete the message before sending it. People only witness behavior. They almost never witness restraint. Restraint is exhausting. Every day he chooses not to call, not to text, not to drive past places they used to visit, not to ask mutual friends how she's doing. Those choices don't look dramatic, but they're still choices. Each one costs something. There's another misconception. People think emotionally avoidant men don't feel deeply. Sometimes, they feel too deeply. That's exactly why they avoid it. If you've spent years believing emotions make you weak, then feeling overwhelmed becomes terrifying. Not because sadness is unbearable, because losing control is. So he doesn't cry. Not often. Instead, his jaw stays tight. His shoulders ache. He clenches his teeth while sleeping. He wakes up tired. His body starts carrying emotions his mind refuses to acknowledge. His coworker notices first. You okay? Yeah. You've got a headache again. Just didn't sleep well. You should slow down. I will. He won't. Because slowing down means feeling. One Friday evening everyone goes out after work. Loud music. Bright lights. Too many conversations happening at once. He laughs. Makes jokes. Buys a round of drinks. Someone even says, "You're finally back." Back. Interesting word. Back where? Back to who he was before. He smiles anyway. Because correcting people would require explaining something he barely understands himself. Around 11 o'clock, he steps outside for fresh air. The street is cooler than expected. Cars pass. People laugh somewhere down the block. He checks his phone. No notifications. For reasons he can't explain. That disappoints him. Not because he expects her to text. He knows she won't. But some irrational part of him still checks. Every time, he puts the phone back into his pocket, looks up at the sky, and for the first time all evening, he stops performing. Nobody is watching. Nobody needs him to be okay. The smile disappears. His shoulders drop. He exhales so deeply it almost surprises him. Sometimes, the heaviest thing a person carries isn't heartbreak. It's the performance of not having one. He starts noticing another strange behavior. Whenever someone asks about the relationship, he immediately becomes analytical. It just wasn't the right timing. We had different priorities. We wanted different things. Everything he says is technically true, but none of it answers the real question. None of it explains why he still pauses outside the bakery she loved. Why he still almost reaches for 2 movie tickets instead of 1. Why he still turns his head every time he hears someone laugh in a way that sounds vaguely familiar. Facts explain events. They don't always explain attachment. One afternoon his mother calls. "You sound tired." "I'm fine." "You've said I'm fine 3 times." "Have I?" A long silence follows. Then she quietly asks, "Do you miss her?" He doesn't answer immediately. Instead, he walks to the kitchen, opens the refrigerator, closes it again, looks out the window, anywhere but at the question. Finally he says, "I don't know." It isn't entirely a lie, because what he misses isn't only her. He misses the version of himself that existed when life still had a familiar rhythm. He misses certainty, routine, expectation. He misses having someone automatically included in every future plan. How do you explain that in one sentence? You can't. So I don't know becomes easier. Weeks pass, then months. People assume time is doing its job. In many ways, it is. The sharp edges soften. He smiles more naturally. He sleeps better. He laughs without forcing it. But every now and then, life catches him unprepared. He hears a phrase she used to say, He sees a jacket that looks like hers from across the street. He reaches for his phone after receiving good news. Not because he forgot she's gone. Because for one brief second, his nervous system still remembers the life where she wasn't. That's the quiet contradiction he never tells anyone. He isn't pretending because he's heartless. He isn't pretending because he never cared. He's pretending because somewhere deep inside, he believes that if he keeps acting like everything is normal, one day his heart might finally believe him. But hearts don't work that way. They don't heal because they're ignored. They heal because, eventually, someone becomes brave enough to stop performing. To stop saying, "I'm fine." To stop confusing silence with strength. And to admit the simple, uncomfortable truth that had been following him for months. I wasn't weak because I missed her. I was only human. For a long time, he believed something was wrong with him. He thought normal people didn't keep noticing someone who had already left. Normal people didn't almost send messages that would never be answered. They didn't look toward the passenger seat. They didn't hear a laugh across a crowded cafe and instinctively turn around. They didn't stand in grocery store aisles wondering why buying cereal suddenly felt lonely. Surely, if he were stronger, smarter, more emotionally disciplined, all of this would have ended by now. That was the story he kept telling himself. Until one ordinary afternoon changed the way he understood everything. It wasn't a special day. Nothing meaningful had happened. No anniversary. No birthday. No unexpected encounter. Just another Tuesday. He had taken the afternoon off because he needed to replace the battery in his car. The mechanic told him it would take an hour. So he walked. No destination. Just moving through familiar streets. The weather wasn't particularly beautiful. Clouds covered most of the sky. People hurried past carrying coffee cups and grocery bags. Children laughed somewhere behind him. A cyclist rang a bell as they passed. Everything about the afternoon felt completely ordinary. And somehow, that was exactly why it mattered. Because without work, without music, without constant distraction, there was finally enough silence for him to notice something. He wasn't looking for her anymore. Not consciously. In fact, he hadn't thought about her all morning. Yet somehow, pieces of her were quietly woven into almost everything around him. The bookstore reminded him of the novel she'd recommended but he never finished. A golden retriever reminded him of the dog she'd always wanted. The bakery reminded him of cinnamon rolls she'd insisted were better than the expensive pastries he liked. None of these memories hurt the way they once had. They simply appeared, then disappeared, like birds landing briefly on a fence before flying away. He stopped walking. That realization surprised him. The memories were still there, but the pain wasn't arriving with them anymore. For months, he had assumed remembering meant he wasn't healing. Now, he wasn't so sure. Maybe memory and suffering weren't actually the same thing. Maybe he'd been confusing them all along. There's something psychologists understand about the brain that many people don't. Healing does not erase memory. It changes the emotional meaning attached to memory. That's a completely different process. The brain almost never deletes important emotional experiences. Instead, it slowly rewrites what those experiences predict about the future. At first, every reminder predicts loss. Eventually, the same reminder simply becomes information. Not because the person mattered less, because your nervous system finally learns. I survived this. He sat on a park bench while waiting for the mechanic to call. An elderly couple walked slowly across the path. The man reached over and adjusted the scarf around a woman's neck without saying a word. She smiled. Neither of them seemed to notice they had just done something beautiful. It looked automatic. Years of repetition. Years of caring without thinking about it. He watched them disappear around the corner. Then something unexpected happened. For the first time in months, he didn't compare them to his own relationship. He simply appreciated what he'd seen. That surprised him a lot, because for so long, every happy couple had felt like proof of something he'd lost. Now, they were simply another couple. Life continuing. Not mocking him. Not reminding him. Just existing. Does this mean you're over her? He thought about that question. Really thought about it. I don't know. Still don't know. No. Then what do you know? I know I don't feel afraid of remembering anymore. That sentence mattered more than he realized. Because fear had quietly become the center of everything. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't even afraid of love. He was afraid of what memory might do to him. Every unexpected reminder had once felt like evidence that he was moving backward. Now, they simply felt human. He began noticing another change. When something funny happened, he still occasionally imagined telling her. But instead of feeling crushed afterward, he smiled. Not because he expected the conversation to happen, because remembering the version of himself who would have told her suddenly felt comforting. That version of him wasn't foolish. He wasn't weak. He had simply loved someone enough to automatically include them in his daily life. Why should he be ashamed of that? For months, he had treated every memory like an enemy. Something to suppress. Something to outrun. Something to defeat. Now he wondered if that had been the reason healing took so long. Every time a memory appeared, he immediately argued with it. Stop thinking about her. Move on. You're wasting your time. Imagine saying those things to someone recovering from a broken leg. Walk faster. Pretend it doesn't hurt. You're taking too long. Healing doesn't respond well to impatience. Neither does grief. One evening, he found the old chipped coffee mug again. The same one he'd avoided throwing away for months. It was still sitting at the back of a cabinet. Dust had collected around the handle. He picked it up, turned it over in his hands, smiled, not because he wanted her back in that moment, because he finally understood why he'd kept it. It had never been about the mug. It had been about what throwing it away seemed to represent. He had believed that letting go of the object meant erasing the relationship, as if memory only survived through physical things. Now, that belief seemed strangely unnecessary. He didn't need the mug to remember. He never had. The memories weren't stored in ceramic. They were stored in him. So he washed it one last time, dried it carefully, looked at the small crack running across the side, then quietly placed it into the recycling bin. No ceremony, no dramatic speech, no tears, just gratitude. It had done its job. That's another thing nobody tells you. Closure rarely arrives as one enormous emotional breakthrough. Most of the time, it's hidden inside tiny decisions. Deleting a number you no longer need. Changing the route you drive home because it finally feels natural. Listening to a song without immediately skipping it. Walking past a familiar restaurant without looking inside. Each decision is almost invisible, but together, they slowly become a new life. Months earlier, he believed moving on meant waking up one morning and realizing she never crossed his mind again. Now he understood how unrealistic the expectation had always been. The people who shape us don't simply disappear. Parents don't. Old friends don't. Teachers don't. First loves don't. People who mattered remain part of the architecture of who we become. The goal isn't forgetting. It's learning to carry memory without letting it carry you. One afternoon, a friend asked him something unexpected. If she called today, what would you do? He laughed. Not because the question was funny, because he genuinely didn't know. A year ago, he would have answered immediately. I'd go. Without hesitation. Now, he paused. Not because he loved her less, because he loved himself differently. He finally understood that missing someone and being right for each other were never exactly the same thing. Sometimes you miss people who no longer belong in your future. That's one of adulthood's most uncomfortable truths. He walked home that evening through the same streets where, months earlier, every corner had reminded him of her. The streets hadn't changed. The cafes were still there. The bookstore was still there. The bakery still smelled like cinnamon. Even the old bench remained exactly where it had always been. Only one thing had changed. The person walking through those streets. For the first time, he noticed something he'd been too distracted to see before. The city had never been full of her. It had been full of him. His expectations. His routines. His predictions. His memories. She hadn't haunted every place. His own nervous system had simply spent months searching for a familiar world that no longer existed. Once that world stopped being an expectation, those places slowly became ordinary again. That's when the entire puzzle finally came together. He hadn't been seeing her everywhere because fate refused to let go. He hadn't been trapped inside some impossible love. His brain had simply been doing what healthy human brains are designed to do. It had built an internal model around someone who once made life feel emotionally predictable. When she disappeared, the model remained. For a while. Long enough to make every street, every song, every grocery store, every empty passenger seat feel strangely haunted. Not by ghosts, by expectation. And expectations, unlike memories, can change. Slowly, quietly, one ordinary day at a time. Maybe that's the most hopeful part of this entire story. Not that he eventually forgot her. He didn't. Some part of him probably never will. Not because he failed to move on. Because meaningful people leave meaningful traces. That's what they do. The real victory was something much quieter. One day, he stopped searching every crowd. He stopped reaching for his phone after every piece of good news. He stopped expecting another set of footsteps in the apartment. Not because he forced himself to stop, but because his heart and his mind had finally learned the same lesson. The relationship had become part of his past, instead of pretending to still belong to his future. And in that quiet acceptance, he discovered something he had spent months looking for. Peace. Not the dramatic kind that arrives with fireworks or grand declarations. The ordinary kind. The kind that lets you smile at an old memory without wishing you could live inside it again. The kind that allows gratitude to quietly replace resistance. The kind that reminds you that loving someone deeply was never the mistake. The mistake was believing that healing required forgetting. It never did. Healing simply asked him to carry the memory differently. And once he learned how, she stopped feeling like she was everywhere. Not because she disappeared, but because he had finally found his way back to himself. If you asked him a year later what the hardest part had been, he probably wouldn't mention the breakup. He wouldn't talk about the last phone call, or the sleepless nights, or the afternoons when every street reminded him of her. Those moments were painful, but pain has a strange quality. It demands your attention while it's happening. Eventually, it softens. What surprised him wasn't the intensity of heartbreak. It was how quietly love continued changing him long after the relationship had ended. Not loudly, not dramatically, just almost invisibly. One Saturday morning, he woke up before his alarm. Sunlight spilled across the bedroom floor. The apartment was unusually quiet. For a moment, he simply lay there, not thinking about anything in particular. No memories, no sadness, no heavy feeling sitting on his chest. Just silence. Peaceful silence. Months ago, silence had frightened him. It had been the place where memories grew louder. Now, it simply sounded like morning. He smiled without realizing it. Not because something wonderful had happened, because nothing painful had happened. Sometimes healing announces itself through absence rather than presence. You don't suddenly become happier. You simply stop hurting every minute. He made coffee, opened the kitchen window, Watched people walking dogs below. A little girl pointed excitedly at a pigeon. An elderly man watered flowers on his balcony. Someone across the street practiced guitar badly. Life continued in thousands of tiny, ordinary ways. And for the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't standing outside of life watching everyone else move forward. He was part of it again. That realization didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived while waiting for coffee to brew. Funny how important moments rarely look important while they're happening. Later that afternoon, he met an old friend for lunch. Someone he hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. They talked about work, travel, family. The conversation wandered naturally through different topics. Eventually, his friend asked, "So, how have you really been?" Months ago, that question would have made him uncomfortable. He would have shrugged, changed the subject, made a joke. This time, he answered honestly, "There was a period where I thought I'd never stop thinking about her." His friend nodded. "And now?" He looked down at his coffee, thought for a second, then smiled. "I still think about her sometimes." Another pause, but now it feels more like remembering a chapter, instead of trying to get back into it. His friend didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some truths don't require advice, only recognition. That's when he realized something important. Healing had never asked him to erase the story, only to stop living inside the same page. Psychologists sometimes describe memory as reconstruction, not replay. Every time we remember something, our brain rebuilds it, piece by piece, which means memories are never completely frozen. They evolve. As we evolve, the breakup hadn't changed. The relationship hadn't changed. But he had, which meant the meaning of those memories slowly changed too. At first, they represented loss, then longing, then gratitude. Not because he forced that transformation, because his own life continued growing around them, like a tree slowly growing around an old scar in its bark. The scar never disappears, but eventually, it's no longer the whole tree. He began noticing small evidence of this everywhere. A cafe they used to visit reopened after renovations. He walked inside, ordered coffee, sat at a table near the window. Months earlier, that would have been impossible. Now, he simply enjoyed the coffee. He still remembered conversations they'd had there, but those conversations no longer competed with the one happening inside his own mind. Memory had finally learned to coexist with the present. One evening, while organizing old photographs on his laptop, he found an album he hadn't opened since they were together. For a long time, he stared at the folder. His hand rested on the mouse. Months earlier, opening those pictures would have ruined his entire night. Now, he clicked. Photo after photo appeared. Road trips, birthdays, random selfies taken while waiting in line somewhere. Pictures of terrible homemade dinners, blurry sunsets, inside jokes captured in frozen expressions nobody else would understand. He laughed, actually laughed. There was sadness too. Of course there was. But something else that existed alongside it now. Appreciation. The pictures no longer felt like evidence of failure. They felt like evidence that something beautiful had once been real. Not permanent. Real. Those are different things. People often assume that relationships only have value if they last forever. But that's not how life works. Think about childhood friendships, teachers who changed your life, cities where you once lived, jobs that shaped who you became. Not everything meaningful stays. Sometimes, its purpose is simply to change you, then leave. Love isn't necessarily different. He thought back to the man he had been before meeting her, then the man he had become while loving her, then the man standing in his kitchen now. None of them were exactly the same person. Every relationship had quietly edited him. She had taught him patience in ways he never noticed, She had taught him to cook more than 3 meals, to slow down during walks, to call his parents more often, to celebrate small victories instead of waiting for enormous ones. Even after she left, those habits remained. It suddenly occurred to him. Pieces of her kindness were still living through him, not because he couldn't let go, because people influence one another. That's what love does. It changes behavior long before it changes memory. Months later, he met someone new. Not dramatically, not like in movies. There was no orchestral music, no instant certainty, just a conversation. Then another, then coffee, then more conversations. He noticed something surprising. He wasn't comparing her to the woman he'd lost. That had been one of his biggest fears. Instead, he found himself becoming curious again. Curiosity, such a simple emotion, yet impossible when your heart is still trapped in yesterday. Curiosity belongs to people who believe tomorrow might contain something worth discovering. Without realizing it, hope had quietly returned. One evening, walking home after dinner, he passed the same park bench where months earlier he'd finally understood why she had seemed to be everywhere. He stopped for a moment, sat down. The bench hadn't changed. The trees looked almost identical. Children still played nearby. Dogs still chased tennis balls. The world remained wonderfully indifferent. He closed his eyes, not searching for memories, simply breathing. Then he whispered something into the evening air. Thank you. Not to her. Not exactly. To the experience. To the version of himself who survived it. To the pain that eventually became understanding. People often think letting go means saying goodbye. But maybe letting go is actually saying thank you. Thank you for what we shared. Thank you for who we became. Thank you for the lessons I didn't understand until much later. And thank you for teaching me that loving deeply was never something I needed to regret. If he could somehow speak to the version of himself from those first impossible weeks, the man who believed she'd always be everywhere, he wouldn't offer complicated advice. He wouldn't promise that everything would magically improve. Instead, he'd probably sit beside him quietly, wait, then say something simple. You're not haunted. You're adapting. Your brain is trying to understand a world that suddenly changed. Give it time. Be patient with yourself. One day, you'll walk these same streets without searching every face. One day, you'll hear her favorite song and simply remember. One day, you'll smile before you feel sad. And eventually, you'll realize the smile stayed. Because that's what healing really is. Not forgetting, not replacing, not pretending the relationship never mattered. Healing is allowing love to take a different form. Instead of needing someone's presence, you carry what they taught you. Instead of expecting another future together, you appreciate the past that helped build who you are. Instead of asking, why can't I stop thinking about her? You begin asking a different question. What part of this experience do I want to carry forward? That question changes everything, because it shifts your attention away from what was lost, toward what remains. And something always remains. Wisdom, compassion, patience, self-awareness, a deeper understanding of what love really asks of us. Maybe that's why some people never completely leave us. Not because they're meant to return. Not because fate keeps pulling us backward, but because every meaningful relationship quietly writes a small part of identity. The goal isn't to undo those changes. It's to let them become part of the person who continues walking forward. As the sun began to set, he stood up from the bench. The city around him looked exactly the same as it had months ago. The same streets, the same cafes, the same traffic lights, the same bookstore, the same bakery with the smell of warm cinnamon drifting through the evening air. Once, every one of those places had whispered her name. Now, they simply belonged to the city again. He smiled, not because he had forgotten, but because he finally understood. Love had never been the prison. Resistance had been. The memories had never been trying to pull him backward. They had only been asking to be acknowledged. Once he stopped fighting them, they quietly found their proper place, not at the center of his life, but as one meaningful chapter inside a much larger story. And perhaps that's the most comforting truth of all. The people we love don't disappear when the relationship ends. They become part of the invisible architecture of who we are. Some leave us with songs. Some leave us with habits. Some leave us with courage we didn't know we possessed. Some leave us with scars that eventually become wisdom. The greatest loves are not always the ones that last forever. Sometimes, they are the ones that teach us how deeply a human heart can feel, how patiently a human mind can heal, and how quietly a person can find their way back home. Not to another person, but to themselves. And in the end, that journey home may have been the real love story all along. By the end of the story, there's one final misunderstanding that deserves to be corrected. People often say, "I'll never forget her," as if forgetting is the goal, as if healing can only be measured by how little someone occupies your mind. But maybe that's the wrong question from the very beginning. Because the deepest relationships don't simply become memories. They become part of the person remembering. And once someone has genuinely changed who you are, forgetting them isn't really possible. Not because you're trapped, because you've already become someone new. Imagine trying to forget the teacher who taught you how to read, or the city where you grew up, or the first time you realized your parents were getting older. Those moments don't replay every day. They don't dominate your thoughts. Yet, they're woven so deeply into who you've become that removing them would mean removing part of yourself. Love works much the same way, especially the kind of love that quietly transforms your inner world. When he first lost her, he thought he wanted one thing. He wanted the memories to disappear. He wanted the random reminders to stop. He wanted to wake up one morning and realize her name no longer carried any emotional weight. Months later, he finally understood something surprising. If all of that had actually happened, he would have lost something valuable. Not her, himself, because the man standing here now existed partly because he had loved her. That realization came unexpectedly, as most important realizations do. He was helping his younger brother move into a new apartment. Cardboard boxes are everywhere, furniture leaning against walls, half-built bookshelves. Someone ordered pizza. Everybody laughed because nobody could find the screws for the dining table. It was chaotic, ordinary, beautiful. At one point, his brother asked, "How do you know the easiest way to pack kitchen stuff?" He answered automatically, "Oh, use towels between the plates so they don't chip." His brother nodded. "Who taught you that?" The question stopped him. For a second, he couldn't remember. Then it came back. She had shown him, years ago, while helping one of her friends move. He smiled, not subtly, just gratefully. There it was again. Another tiny piece of her still quietly living inside him. Not as longing, as knowledge. Psychologists sometimes talk about something called self-expansion theory. The basic idea is beautifully simple. When we love someone deeply, our sense of self expands. Their interests become part of ours. Their routines influence ours. Their habits blend with ours. Their ways of seeing the world slowly become available to us. The boundary between me and you becomes a little softer. That's one reason breakups feel so disorienting. You're not only losing another person, you're reorganizing your own identity. For months, he believed he needed to recover the version of himself that existed before meeting her. Eventually, he realized that version no longer existed. And maybe it wasn't supposed to. Growth rarely works in reverse. You don't become who you were. You become someone who includes what happened. Think about a tree. Every year, it grows another ring. The old rings never disappear. They're buried deeper beneath new growth, invisible from the outside, essential on the inside. Nobody would look at an old tree and say, "You should remove the rings from 10 years ago." Those rings are the reason the tree stands today. Human hearts grow the same way. Every meaningful connection leaves another ring. Some are joyful, some painful, some are barely remembered consciously. But together, they become the structure holding everything else upright. One rainy afternoon, he walked into a bookstore, not looking for anything specific, just wandering. He found himself stopping in front of the psychology section. Months earlier, he would have walked past it. Now, he picked up a book about attachment. He smiled, not because he needed answers anymore, because he remembered how desperately he'd searched for them. He bought the book anyway. Later that night, while reading, one sentence caught his attention. It explained that secure attachment doesn't eliminate grief. It simply allows grief to transform over time rather than remain frozen. He closed the book, thought quietly. That's exactly what had happened. The grief hadn't disappeared. It had evolved, like water changing from crashing waves into a calm lake. Still water, still real, just no longer destructive. There was another thing he finally understood. For months, he had blamed himself for every reminder, every unexpected memory, every emotional setback. Now, he looked at those moments differently. Each reminder had actually been evidence of something profoundly human. His brain had loved efficiently. It had built predictions, created routines, stored emotional safety, integrated another person into everyday life. None of that was weakness. It was precisely how healthy attachment is supposed to work. The suffering came not because his brain malfunctioned. The suffering came because it had to slowly learn that reality had changed. One evening, while cleaning old files from his phone, he found voice messages. Not many, just a few. For a long time, he stared at the screen. Months earlier, he would have deleted them immediately out of fear, or listened to them over and over. Now, he simply pressed play once. Her voice filled the room. Familiar, warm, ordinary. She was talking about groceries, laughing because she'd forgotten something. Nothing profound, nothing romantic, just life. He listened until the message ended. Then he smiled, not because he wished he could hear it forever, because he realized something beautiful. For a few seconds, he had remembered someone exactly as they truly were. Not idealized, not exaggerated, just human. Sometimes memory becomes healthiest when it allows people to remain ordinary. Not perfect. There had been a time when he turned her into a symbol. The love of his life. The one who got away. The only person who could ever understand him. Heartbreak often does that. It edits reality, leaves only the brightest moments, deletes the difficult ones. But time had restored balance. Now, he remembered the disagreements too, the misunderstandings, the days they were impatient, the habits that frustrated both of them. Oddly enough, that made the memories feel even more loving, because real love doesn't require perfection, only reality. A friend once asked him, "So, if you could go back, would you do it all again?" He didn't answer immediately. Years earlier, the answer would have been easy. Either yes because he missed her, or no because he wanted to avoid the pain. Now, the question felt more complicated. Finally, he nodded. Yes. His friend looked surprised, even knowing how it ends. He smiled, especially knowing how it ends. Why? Because the ending isn't the whole story. That answer stayed with him. People judge relationships almost entirely by their endings. But imagine doing that with books, or music, or friendships, or childhood. Would you call childhood meaningless simply because it ended? Of course not. Its value came from how it shaped you. Love deserves the same generosity. As the seasons continued changing, he noticed something remarkable. There were now entire weeks, sometimes months, where she never appeared in his thoughts. Not because he forced her out, because life had naturally become fuller. New conversations, new routines, new places, new challenges. The mind doesn't stop remembering. It simply gains more to remember. That's one of healing's quietest miracles. It expands your future instead of deleting your past. Then one autumn afternoon, quite unexpectedly, he walked past someone wearing the exact perfume she used to wear. For one brief second, time folded. His heart recognized it instantly. He stopped walking, closed his eyes, breathed in, and then something beautiful happened. He smiled, not because he imagined she'd somehow returned, not because he felt overwhelmed, just because one scent had carried an entire chapter of his life inside it. Then he kept walking. That was all. No spiral, no sleepless night, no emotional collapse, just recognition, then continuation. If someone had told the broken version of him months earlier that this moment would someday feel so peaceful, he never would have believed them. Perhaps that's the greatest misunderstanding about healing. People imagine it as a destination, a finish line, a morning when all pain suddenly disappears forever. Real healing is much quieter. It's answering a question about someone without your voice shaking. It's hearing a familiar song and listening until the end. It's walking through places that once hurt and noticing the trees instead. It's remembering without needing to return. If there's one final truth hidden inside this entire journey, it's this: she was never impossible to forget because she was extraordinary beyond comparison. She was impossible to forget because she became part of the way his mind organized the world. And when that organization changed, it wasn't because memory disappeared. It was because his life grew large enough to hold both the past and the present at the same time. So perhaps the real ending was never about forgetting her. It was about becoming someone who no longer needed forgetting to feel free. Someone who understood that memories are not chains. They are evidence. Evidence that we dared to care. Evidence that another human being once mattered enough to leave fingerprints on our habits, our thoughts, our language, and even the quiet choices we make when nobody is watching. And those fingerprints, if they were left by genuine love, were never meant to be scrubbed away. They were meant to become part of the story written beneath everything that came afterward. Because in the end, the greatest gift she left behind was not the memory of who she had been. It was the person he had become because she had existed. And maybe that's what every meaningful relationship quietly teaches us. The people we lose do not remain with us because our hearts refuse to move forward. They remain because every act of love changes the architecture of the person who gives it. We never return to who we were before. We carry every meaningful connection into the next version of ourselves. Not as unfinished business, not as emotional weight, but as wisdom, as perspective, as kindness, as quiet strength. And one day, without even noticing when it happened, we stop asking, "Why can't I forget?" Because we finally discovered the answer. We were never meant to forget. We were only meant to keep becoming. If you've stayed through this entire journey, there's something important you may have noticed. This story was never really about one man, or one woman, or one relationship. It was about something much larger. It was about what happens inside the human mind whenever love becomes part of our identity. Because despite what movies often tell us, the hardest relationships to leave behind are not always the most dramatic. They're usually the quiet ones. The ones built through thousands of ordinary moments. Morning coffee, shared grocery lists, inside jokes, comfortable silence, text messages that simply said, I'm home. A hand reaching across the table without thinking. These moments rarely seem extraordinary while we're living them, but our brains are paying attention. Every single time. Throughout this story, we've explored ideas from psychology rather than mythology. Not because love is less magical than people imagine, but because understanding the mind doesn't make love smaller. It makes it even more remarkable. Your brain is constantly building models of the people closest to you. It predicts their voice before they speak. It anticipates their reactions. It knows how quickly they walk, how they laugh, how they sigh after a long day, how they pause before answering difficult questions. None of this requires conscious effort. It happens quietly, automatically, repeatedly. Love is not only something we feel, it's something our nervous system gradually learns. That is why forgetting can never happen overnight. Because learning never happens overnight. Think about riding a bicycle. Years after your last ride, your body still remembers. Not because you're trying, because experience became part of your nervous system. Emotional attachment works through many of the same learning processes. Only instead of balance and movement, the brain learns emotional safety, predictability, connection, belonging. When that connection suddenly disappears, the learning doesn't vanish with it. It slowly reorganizes, patiently, sometimes painfully, but always gradually. Perhaps that's why so many people misunderstand heartbreak. They imagine someone is refusing to move forward, refusing to let go, still obsessed, still attached. Sometimes that's true, but often, what looks like emotional weakness is actually emotional adaptation. The mind is recalibrating after one of the biggest changes a human being can experience. And recalibration takes time. If you've ever wondered, why do I still think about them when I don't even want them back? The answer may surprise you. Because wanting someone and remembering someone are not the same experience. One belongs to desire, the other belongs to learning. You can stop wanting a future together, while your brain continues updating years of emotional predictions. That isn't failure. It's biology. It's attachment. It's what healthy human brains naturally do after meaningful relationships. Near the end of his journey, he realized something he wished someone had told him from the beginning. Healing wasn't a competition. There wasn't a deadline. There wasn't a correct number of weeks, or months, or years. There was only one meaningful question. Am I becoming more available for the life that's in front of me? Not, how often do I think about the past? Those are very different questions. Because memory is passive. Life is active. One evening, he sat outside watching the sunset. Nothing unusual had happened that day. He had worked, cooked dinner, answered emails, called his parents, watered the plants on his balcony. The sky slowly turned orange. Birds crossed above the rooftops. The city became quieter. He realized something almost funny. Months ago, he would have wanted to share this moment with her. Now, he was simply grateful to be present for it. Not because sunsets had changed, because he had. That may sound like a small difference. It isn't. It means his attention had finally returned to the present instead of constantly negotiating with the past. There's a quiet freedom that comes when your life stops revolving around one unanswered question. What if things had been different? For a long time, that question had followed him everywhere. What if he'd called sooner? What if he'd listened more carefully? What if they'd met at a different time in life? What if one conversation had gone differently? The human brain loves unfinished stories. It searches endlessly for alternate endings. But eventually, he understood something. Every imagined version of the past required sacrificing the only thing that was actually real. The present. And the present was asking for his attention. Not because it wanted him to forget, because it wanted him to continue living. Psychologists sometimes describe resilience as the ability to integrate difficult experiences into a coherent life story. Not erase them, not deny them, integrate them. That word matters. Integration means the experience becomes part of your identity, without becoming your entire identity. At first, the breakup had defined everything. Every conversation, every thought, every decision. Gradually, it became one chapter among many. Still meaningful, still influential, but no longer the headline of his life. Maybe that's the quiet destination every broken heart is moving toward. Not emotional amnesia, emotional integration. A place where love becomes wisdom instead of longing. Where memories become perspective instead of pain. Where gratitude slowly replaces resistance. Months later, someone new asked him a simple question. Have you ever been in love? He smiled. There was no hesitation anymore. Yes. What was it like? He looked out the window for a moment, searching for words. Then he answered. It changed me. Nothing more. Nothing less. Not. It destroyed me. Not. It ruined my life. Not. It was the biggest mistake I ever made. Simply, it changed me. Perhaps that's the most honest definition of love anyone can offer. If she could somehow hear him now, he wouldn't ask for another chance. He wouldn't ask why things happened the way they did. He wouldn't ask whether she still thought about him. Some questions lose their importance when enough life happens afterward. Instead, he might simply say, I hope you're well. And he would mean it. Not because he'd forgotten everything, because he had finally learned that caring about someone's well-being doesn't always require being part of their life. That's one of the quiet signs of emotional maturity. Love no longer demands possession. It simply wishes another person peace. As this story comes to an end, it's worth returning to the question we asked at the very beginning. What makes us so hard to forget? The answer isn't mystery. It isn't fate. It isn't destiny pulling invisible strings. It's something both simpler and more profound. She became difficult to forget because the relationship became part of the way his mind understood home. Not a physical place, an emotional one. For a while, her presence represented familiarity, safety, shared meaning, predictability. When she disappeared, his brain kept searching for the emotional home it had spent years building. Eventually, it built a new one, not by replacing her, by expanding. That's what healing really is. The construction of a new emotional home that can hold the past without living inside it. And perhaps that's the most hopeful truth psychology has to offer. The human brain is remarkably adaptable. It remembers, but it also rewrites. It grieves, but it also reorganizes. It mourns, but it also grows. Not because it forgets what mattered, because it learns how to carry what mattered differently. If you're listening to this today, perhaps because someone still appears in your thoughts more often than you'd like, perhaps because certain streets still feel strangely familiar, or because a song still has the power to transport you backward without warning, please remember this. None of those experiences necessarily mean you're stuck. They may simply mean your mind is still completing one of the most complicated forms of learning it will ever undertake. Learning how to love someone, and learning how to continue living after they are gone, are both extraordinary achievements of the human heart. One teaches us connection, the other teaches us resilience. Both leave permanent marks. One day, without realizing when it happened, you may walk through the same places that once hurt you. The cafe where you spent Sunday mornings. The grocery store where you argued about which cereal to buy. The street where you once waited together in the rain. The park bench where difficult conversations unfolded. You will notice something surprising. Those places won't belong to your grief anymore. They'll belong to your life. Because your life kept moving. Quietly, patiently, one ordinary day at a time. So if there's one final idea worth carrying with you after this story ends, let it be this. The people who matter most rarely disappear from us completely. Not because we failed to let go, but because love is one of the experiences that permanently reshapes the architecture of the mind. The goal was never to erase those changes. The goal was to allow them to become part of a life that continues expanding. To remember, without remaining trapped. To appreciate, without needing to return. To love what was, while still making room for what could be. Because the healthiest ending isn't the one where someone vanishes from your memory. It's the one where they no longer prevent you from discovering new chapters. And perhaps, that's what this entire journey has really been about. Not how one woman became impossible to forget, but how one man slowly discovered that the heart is capable of something even more remarkable than remembering. It is capable of growing around what it cannot change, of carrying love without carrying suffering, of honoring the past without surrendering the future. And in that quiet transformation, he finally understood that she had never been everywhere. She had simply been one meaningful part of the map that led him back to himself. The map changed. The journey continued. And for the first time in a very long time, he walked forward without looking back. Not because the past no longer mattered, but because the future had finally become large enough to welcome him home. If you've listened from the very beginning, you may have expected this story to end with a reunion, or perhaps with complete closure. Maybe you imagined there would be one final conversation, one dramatic confession, one unexpected phone call, one last chance. Stories often teach us that endings must be spectacular. Real life rarely does. Most meaningful endings arrive quietly, so quietly that we often don't recognize them until long afterward. The truth is, the most important reunion in this story was never going to happen between two people. It was always going to happen within one person. Months after everything had changed, he was walking home through the city after work. The streets were busy. Cyclists rushed past. People carried grocery bags. A child laughed as bubbles floated across the sidewalk. Nothing remarkable, just another ordinary evening. Then he noticed something. He had walked this exact route dozens of times during the months after the breakup. Once, every corner had reminded him of her. The cafe where they used to meet. The bookstore where she once insisted he buy a novel he never expected to enjoy. The small flower shop where they stopped simply because she liked the smell of fresh lavender. For months, the city had felt like a museum of memories. Now, it simply felt like a city. The buildings hadn't changed. The sidewalks hadn't changed. He had. And suddenly he understood something that psychologists have been describing for decades. Our emotional world is not determined only by the places we visit. It is shaped by the meanings we attach to those places. When the meanings change, the world itself begins to feel different. There is a concept in psychology known as memory reconsolidation. Every time we remember an experience, we don't pull a perfect recording from a mental archive. Instead, we reconstruct it. The memory becomes briefly flexible. It can absorb new emotional information before being stored again. That means healing is not about deleting memories. It is about updating them. At first, every memory of her carried one message. She's gone. Later, those same memories carried a different one. She mattered. Eventually, they carried something even quieter. I survived. The events never changed. The emotional meaning did. That subtle shift changes everything. He used to believe that if he smiled while remembering her, it meant he hadn't really loved her. Because shouldn't real love always hurt? But pain is not proof of love. Duration is not proof of love. Suffering is not proof of devotion. Sometimes, the healthiest form of love is the one that eventually allows gratitude to replace grief. One afternoon, he visited his parents. His mother was making soup. His father was outside fixing a broken gate. Everything felt familiar, comfortable. While setting the table, his mother looked at him and said something unexpected. "You laugh more now." He looked confused. "Do I?" She nodded. "I didn't notice when you stopped." The room became quiet. Because she was right. He hadn't noticed either. Healing often happens too slowly for the person experiencing it. Other people sometimes recognize it first. Your shoulders relax before you realize they're no longer tense. You sleep through the night before noticing the nightmares are gone. You laugh at a joke without wondering whether someone else would have laughed too. Life returns in tiny pieces. Never all at once. Always quietly. He began paying attention to these small changes. He no longer checked his phone hoping for a message that would never come. He no longer replayed conversations searching for hidden meanings. He stopped imagining impossible alternate endings. Instead, he found himself thinking about future vacations, books he wanted to read, recipes he wanted to learn, friends he hadn't called in too long. His mind had slowly stopped orbiting around loss. It had started moving toward possibility. Hope rarely arrives dramatically. It usually returns disguised as curiosity. A few weeks later, while cleaning his apartment, he found an old notebook. Inside were plans they had made together, places they wanted to visit, restaurants they wanted to try, goals they hoped to reach before turning 30. For a brief moment, he simply stared at the pages. There was no wave of panic, no desperate longing, just a gentle ache. Then something surprising happened. He picked up a pen, not to erase what they'd written, to continue writing underneath it. Some of the dreams stayed. Some changed. Some no longer mattered. Others had become even more important. That moment captured the entire journey. Healing wasn't crossing out the old pages. It was continuing the story. There is something deeply human about believing that love only matters if it lasts forever. Yet almost everything meaningful in life has an ending. Childhood ends. School ends. Summer ends. Parents grow older. Children grow up. Friends move away. Entire chapters of our lives quietly close. We don't call those experiences meaningless because they ended. We recognize them as meaningful because they shaped us. Why should love be judged by a different standard? Perhaps the value of a relationship isn't measured by how long it lasted. Perhaps it's measured by how honestly two people change while they shared it. He thought about that often. Not because he wanted to romanticize the past, because he wanted to understand it accurately. Heartbreak had once convinced him that the relationship was either a complete success or a complete failure. Time revealed something more mature. It had been neither. It had simply been real. Real relationships include tenderness and misunderstanding, joy and disappointment, growth and limitation. Two imperfect people doing the best they could with the emotional tools they had at the time. Accepting that reality felt strangely freeing. He no longer needed the relationship to be perfect in order for it to have mattered. Months later, someone at work asked him, "What's the best advice you've ever received?" He thought for a moment, then remembered something he had once read during the darkest part of his healing. Don't measure your progress by how often you remember them. Measure it by how fully you participate in the life that's happening now. At the time, those words had felt impossible. Now, they simply felt true, because memories had never stopped appearing. But they no longer interrupted his life. They accompanied it, like photographs in a hallway you occasionally glance at while walking toward another room. One rainy evening, he sat by the window with a cup of tea. Rain tapped gently against the glass. Cars moved slowly through wet streets. The familiar rhythm reminded him of another rainy evening years ago. She had fallen asleep on the couch while a movie played in the background. For just a second, the memory returned with astonishing clarity. The sound of the rain, the blanket folded around her, the half-finished mug of tea on the table. He smiled, closed his eyes, allowed himself to remain there for a few quiet seconds. Then he opened his eyes again. The rain outside belonged to tonight, not yesterday. That was the difference. He no longer needed to escape the memory, nor did he need to stay inside it. He could visit, and then come home. Perhaps that's what emotional freedom actually looks like. Not the absence of memory. The freedom to enter a memory without becoming trapped there. To remember without reliving. To appreciate without returning. To honor without clinging. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is constantly trying to reduce uncertainty. It builds predictions based on experience. When someone becomes central to your daily life, they become part of those predictions. The breakup disrupted those expectations. Healing was never about convincing himself she had never mattered. It was about helping his brain build new expectations, new routines, new meanings, new futures. Slowly, the nervous system stopped waiting for footsteps that would never come, stopped expecting messages that would never arrive, stopped preparing for conversations that no longer existed. Not because it forgot, because it learned. Learning is one of the most hopeful things the human brain can do. Eventually, he stopped asking himself one particular question. Why did this happen? It had haunted him for months. He had searched for one perfect explanation, one mistake, one decisive moment. But life rarely offers clean answers. Relationships ended for countless reasons. Timing, fear, growth, misunderstanding, different needs, changing identities. Waiting for a perfect explanation had kept him tied to the past. Accepting uncertainty allowed him to walk into the future. Sometimes, peace begins where certainty ends. If he could now meet the version of himself from the first chapter, the man who believed she would haunt every street forever, he would recognize him immediately. The exhausted eyes, the constant overthinking, the quiet desperation hidden beneath everyday routines. He wouldn't criticize him. He would sit beside him, maybe hand him a cup of coffee, and after a long silence, he would say, "You don't have to rush. This isn't a race. Your heart isn't broken because it's weak. It's changing because it learned to love. And one day, you'll discover something that feels impossible right now. You'll realize that the love you thought you had lost never actually disappeared. It simply changed its form. Because that is the final truth. The love you keep is never the relationship exactly as it once existed. You don't keep the daily routines, the shared apartment, the conversations, the future you imagined together. Those things belong to the past. What remains is something quieter. You keep the patience you learned, the empathy you developed, the courage you discovered, the awareness of your own emotional patterns, the understanding that vulnerability is not weakness. You keep the ability to recognize another person's humanity because someone once recognized yours. That is the version of love that cannot be taken away. Perhaps this is why some people continue influencing our lives decades after we've said goodbye. Not because we failed to move on, but because genuine love always leaves traces. Not chains, not unfinished business. Traces. In the way we speak, in the way we comfort a friend, in the meals we cook, in the songs that still make us pause for a moment, in the quiet decisions that no one else ever notices. The relationship ends. Its influence continues. So if you're listening to this while wondering whether you'll ever truly heal, remember this. Healing does not ask you to become someone who never loved. It asks you to become someone who can love without being imprisoned by memory. Someone who can carry yesterday with gentle hands while continuing to build tomorrow. Someone who understands that letting go is not an act of forgetting. It is an act of trust. Trust that the heart is capable of growing larger than its deepest flaws. And perhaps that is the most beautiful discovery of all. Not that she became easy to forget, but that he finally became impossible to break. Because the story that began with one unforgettable woman was never really about her. It was about the quiet transformation of an ordinary human heart. A heart that learned how attachment is formed, how grief reshapes identity, how memory slowly changes its meaning, and how love, when it is fully understood, doesn't end when two people walk in different directions. It continues in every wiser choice they make afterward. In the end, the greatest love we carry is not the one that stays exactly as it was. It is the one that teaches us how to become more compassionate, more resilient, and more fully alive than we were before we ever met. And that kind of love never asks us to look backward forever. It gently takes our hand, points toward the horizon, and reminds us that the next chapter has been waiting for us all along. Every story about love quietly hides another story beneath it. At first, we believe we're searching for someone else, someone who will understand us, choose us, stay with us, complete us. But if we pay close enough attention, if we're willing to sit with heartbreak instead of running from it, we eventually discover something unexpected. The person we've been searching for all along was never entirely outside of us. It was the version of ourselves we had forgotten how to become. When this journey began, he believed he had lost the most important person in his life. And perhaps he had. But there was another loss he couldn't yet see. Somewhere between loving someone and losing them, he had slowly stopped listening to himself. His moods depended on someone else's presence. His future depended on someone else's decisions. His sense of peace depended on someone else's affection. Without realizing it, he had handed over the responsibility of his emotional home. Not because he was weak, because that's what many people do when love becomes the center of their identity. Psychologists call it emotional dependence, not necessarily in a pathological sense. Simply the gradual process of organizing your inner world around another person's existence. It happens slowly, almost invisibly, one shared habit at a time, one routine at a time, one future plan at a time, until one day, their absence feels like your own disappearance. For months, that was exactly how he experienced life. He didn't just miss her. He missed the version of himself who laughed more easily, who made spontaneous plans, who believed tomorrow held exciting possibilities. Every morning, he woke up hoping the ache would finally be smaller. Every evening, he measured his healing by whether he had thought about her less than yesterday. He believed recovery meant escaping the past. He didn't realize recovery was quietly inviting him toward himself. One Saturday morning, long after the hardest days had passed, he woke before sunrise. No alarm, no particular reason. The apartment was still. The city outside hadn't fully awakened. He made coffee, opened the window. Cool air drifted inside. Birds had begun singing somewhere beyond the rooftops. For a long time, he simply stood there, not thinking, not analyzing, just noticing the warmth of the mug, the sound of distant traffic, the changing colors of the sky. And then, without warning, he smiled, not because anything extraordinary had happened, because nothing needed to happen. For the first time in years, peace wasn't arriving from outside. It was already inside the room, inside him. That realization stayed with him throughout the day. He walked to the local market, bought fresh fruit, stopped to watch an elderly couple choosing flowers. The husband carefully held each bouquet while his wife compared colors. They laughed over something neither of them seemed eager to explain. Watching them, he expected to feel sadness. Instead, he felt hope, not because he imagined himself standing there someday, because he realized love was still possible. His heart hadn't closed. It had healed. There is an important difference. A closed heart avoids pain by avoiding connection. A healed heart understands pain and chooses connection anyway. Modern neuroscience tells us that the brain remains remarkably adaptable throughout life. Neural pathways strengthen with repetition. Old habits weaken when they're no longer reinforced. New experiences gradually reshape our expectations. This process is known as neuroplasticity. People often think of it when learning languages or recovering from injuries. But emotional healing depends on the same principle. Each morning he chose to take a walk. Each conversation he allowed himself to enjoy. Each new memory he created. Each moment he stayed present instead of replaying the past. His brain was changing. Not dramatically, quietly, one ordinary experience at a time. Healing wasn't one decision. It was thousands of tiny repetitions. Months later, he traveled alone for the first time. Nothing extravagant, just a small coastal town a few hours away. Years earlier, he would have felt incomplete without someone beside him. Now, he carried a backpack, a camera, and a paperback novel. He wandered unfamiliar streets, ordered food he couldn't pronounce, got lost twice, laughed at himself, sat on a pier watching fishing boats return before sunset. There was nobody to impress, nobody to update, nobody expecting photographs. Yet strangely, he had never felt more present. Sometimes, solitude is not the absence of company. It is the return of your own attention. That evening, he wrote something in his journal. Not about her, not about the breakup, just one sentence. I think I'm finally becoming someone I enjoy spending time with. He read it twice, then closed the notebook. Months earlier, those words would have sounded impossible. Now, they felt obvious. Perhaps that's one of the least discussed consequences of heartbreak. It forces us to ask questions we were avoiding before. Who am I when nobody is watching? What kind of life feels meaningful to me? What values belong to me, rather than to the relationship I was trying to preserve? Which dreams were genuinely mine, and which were simply borrowed? These questions don't have immediate answers, but they change everything. Because eventually, our identity stops growing around another person. It starts growing from within. One afternoon, he visited the park where they had once spent an entire Sunday talking about the future. He sat on the same bench. Children played nearby. A man jogged past wearing headphones. Two teenagers argued about directions before laughing at themselves. Life continued exactly as it always had. He closed his eyes, expected memories, and memories came. Her laughter, the way she tucked loose hair behind her ear, the conversation about where they imagined living someday, the silence that followed. He let every memory arrive. None of them frightened him anymore. When he opened his eyes, he noticed something remarkable. The bench no longer belonged to the relationship. It belonged to the afternoon. He smiled, not because he had forgotten, because he no longer needed the past to explain the present. Attachment theory teaches us that secure relationships help us explore the world. A securely attached child wanders away from a parent, not because the parent becomes unimportant, but because safety makes exploration possible. Healthy adult love works similarly. The paradox is beautiful. The strongest relationships don't make us smaller. They make us larger. Yet sometimes, after loss, we accidentally reverse that process. Instead of exploring again, we stay emotionally frozen at the moment everything ended. Healing begins when exploration returns, not necessarily through another romance. Through curiosity, learning, friendship, creativity, purpose, life slowly becomes interesting again. And interest is one of hope's earliest forms. As the seasons changed, people around him noticed subtle differences. His sister said, "You seem lighter." An old friend commented, "You actually answer messages now." His co-workers noticed he laughed during lunch breaks again. None of them knew how much work those small moments represented. Because healing is invisible labor, No applause follows the morning you finally stop checking someone's social media. Nobody celebrates the afternoon you realize you haven't replayed the breakup conversation in weeks. There are no awards for choosing peace over rumination. Yet these quiet victories reshape entire lives. One evening, he received a message from someone he hadn't spoken to in years. An old university friend. They met for dinner, talked for hours. Careers, travel, family, books, dreams. At one point, his friend asked, "So, what's the biggest thing you've learned over the past few years?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched people passing outside the restaurant window. Couples, families, people eating alone, friends laughing, life unfolding in countless directions. Finally, he spoke. "I used to think love meant finding someone who completed me." His friend nodded. "And now?" He smiled. "I think love is meeting someone while already being whole." Silence settled between them. Not awkward silence. The kind that follows a sentence both people recognize as true. That night, walking home beneath a sky scattered with stars, he thought about everything that had happened. The beginning, the excitement, the ordinary days, the misunderstandings, the ending, the grief, the endless questions, the healing. None of it felt wasted anymore. Every experience had become part of a larger education, not about relationships, about being human. He had learned that memory is reconstructive rather than permanent, that attachment is biological before it is poetic, that grief is evidence of adaptation rather than weakness, that identity can fracture and be rebuilt, that healing doesn't erase love, it transforms it. Most importantly, he had learned something no psychology textbook could fully explain. The heart has an astonishing capacity to grow around what it cannot change. If he could now write a letter to the version of himself from the very first chapter, the man convinced that life had ended, perhaps it would read something like this: "You believe you're losing the person who made your life meaningful. You're wrong. You're losing one chapter. The meaning isn't disappearing. It's changing authors. One day you'll wake up and realize your happiness no longer depends on recovering the past. It will come from creating a future. And when that day arrives, you'll thank the person you once believed destroyed you. Not because the pain was necessary, but because surviving it introduced you to someone extraordinary. Yourself." Perhaps that is why every meaningful ending contains the seed of a beginning. Not because suffering is magical, not because everything happens for a reason, but because human beings possess an extraordinary ability to create meaning from experience. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth. It doesn't mean trauma is good. It doesn't mean heartbreak is desirable. It means people are capable of becoming wiser, more compassionate, and more authentic after enduring profound loss. Growth is not guaranteed, but it is possible. Every day, in ordinary moments, through ordinary choices. So, what became of the woman who was once impossible to forget? She remained exactly where she belonged. In memory, not as an unfinished sentence, not as a lifelong wound, not as the center of his universe, but as one beautiful, complicated, deeply human chapter that permanently influenced the story of his life. And what became of the man who believed he would never recover? He kept walking. He built new routines. He made new memories. He discovered new dreams. He loved his family more intentionally. He became kinder to strangers. He listened more carefully. He judged himself less harshly. He stopped searching for someone to rescue him, because he finally understood. The strongest version of himself had been quietly waiting beneath the grief all along. And perhaps, if this story has reminded you of someone you once loved, someone whose name still occasionally echoes through your thoughts, someone whose absence once convinced you that happiness had left forever, I hope you remember this. The goal is not to become someone who never looks back. The goal is to become someone who can look back with tenderness instead of regret, to remember with gratitude instead of desperation, to honor what was, while remaining fully available for what is still possible. Because every ending leaves us with two choices. We can spend our lives trying to reopen a closed chapter, or we can pick up the pen, turn the page, and discover that the most meaningful story was never about finding the perfect person. It was about becoming the person capable of carrying love without losing themselves. In the end, that is the quiet miracle of healing. Not that the memories disappear, not that the pain never existed, but that one ordinary morning, without fanfare, without anyone noticing, you wake up, look out the window, take a slow breath, and realize the life you've been waiting to get back is already here. It always was. You were simply becoming the person ready to live it.